coach, I'm ready to play fantasy. I know I turned 2 in a day, but the lace isn't hot in my veins. I can turn 2 in every way, so I turn to YouTube today and smash play. I'm prepared to listen. The X-Fippin' whip got me looking way past the pitches. Statistics all that I know, and I know that who is on first, he can say I'm ready to go. I ain't trying to steal second or third, cause I wanna win first. How am I to put all of these numbers to words? I know the terms from A to Z, it's like a gift and a curse. I know the difference between a splitter and a curve, but if I can't put it into points, man, then what's it worth? I need the truth, I need knowledge. Found this podcast with all of it, but what they call it? Turn 2, what it do? Win leagues, catch out. Peace.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Turn 2 podcast. I'm your host, Matt Williams. You can find me on Twitter at MATTWI77IMS. Today we have a special episode midweek where we're going to be talking all about opportunity costs, and there's not a better guest in the world to have on than the one I have right now. You can see if you're watching live on YouTube or if you're listening back on the podcast. I have Mr. Ariel Cohen, the creator of the ATC projections. You can find him over on Fangraphs, CBS. He's kind of everywhere. But anyway, fantastic guest. First time on the show. Ariel, welcome to Turn 2. What's up?
Oh, thanks so much for the warm welcome, and so excited to be on the show with you. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Trying to be optimistic about the lockout situation that they're meeting every day. They haven't talked about the CBT much, which has me worried, but hey, meeting every day is good, right? It's better than not meeting every day.
Yes, meeting every day is good. I mean, from a fantasy analyst standpoint, it's not about being optimistic. It's about, dealing with the information. But yeah, of course, let's be optimistic. Maybe we won't miss any time, just a couple of spring training games. I mean, I got to get back to baseball. Hey, my softball league is playing, and we're starting the last week in March. We don't care about no negotiations. We're on schedule.
I mean, I from the beginning, my prediction was this gets signed the last week or the end of the first week of March, and looking okay for that right now because these things can come together quickly. MLB already took care of, if anyone missed the news, MLB already took care of a lot of the small print back end stuff. So if this can snowball very quickly and can come together in a day or two. So, we'll see how it goes.
It's about money, right? So if you're whatever side you're on, you're going to be negotiating the best deal that you can. And I haven't really seen any big movement on either side with the money amounts.
What do you mean? They're constantly moving $5 million closer.
Back the other way. Right? The players went up the other way. I think the players on the side want to show that, we're not going to stand for it and we're just going to wait it out. I mean, the owners, to be honest, the owners can wait it out longer because the value of the club is less in the revenue. It's more in their the brand value. And if they sell a couple of years later, the money, the name and the company just goes up. So, if you don't want to have some revenue, you don't want to pay a couple of players, and the revenue they make in season is incomparable to the name brand. So I don't think there's a big incentive for the owners to move much. And I don't know if the players recognize that, but the players want to say we want our best deal. So this is why we have this kind of fierce negotiation here.
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully that gets on track pretty soon. Right now we're talking as if there's going to be a season pretty soon because, what's the alternative? No reason to be a Debbie Downer here. So we're going to talk about opportunity costs. This is something that I really hint at in most episodes. If you follow my article over MNBC Sports Edge by the numbers, I'm talking about it constantly. And it's just something that it's kind of leaves its fingerprint on everything anyone ever talks about in terms of strategy. But it's something that doesn't get talked about specifically enough. And I think it's something that actually gets overlooked when talking about player value projections, ADP and everything, because it kind of hits on all of those. So that's what we're talking about today. So this is, again, Ariel, perfect guest for this. So first of all, opportunity cost. What is it? By definition, it's more of a term in economics that kind of is described as the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. So in fantasy baseball terms is you kind of weigh your options in terms of what you're giving up by selecting one player over another. a lot of people make the mistake of just simply going apples to apples. Like this player is projected to do better than this player. We'll get into all the caveats there, but obviously there's positional scarcity. There's, how strength, how strong a position is, how strong a statistic is that you're searching for in particular. So it's also not used for making not only a decision in the now, but projecting future decisions in order to end your draft with the pretty much the most profitable outcome possible. So what are your thoughts in general, Ariel, on how to define that, how everyone should use opportunity costs in fantasy? And we'll get into like specifically projections first, because that's what you do. Like, how do you think people should use them in terms of not just looking at how a player is projected to do versus another player, but how this is important to like kind of look at a bunch of different variables?
So I think the easiest way to understand what opportunity cost is and how your fantasy team is an economic system, right? Because that's what it really is the waiver wire. when you're looking for a player and it's the middle of May and you say, "Oh wow, look at this player! This guy hit 3 home runs this week. Wow, he's got a lot of hits this week. He's batting 500 on the week. I think I'm going to add him to my roster." And the question is that a good idea? Sure, if you have an unlimited spots on your roster, why not add him? Why not? Right? If there's nothing to lose, then you might as well add him. But the question, of course, is not, do you want to add him? Because when you do waiver wire, it's not an add, it's an add/drop. You have to drop somebody to add the guy. And so you have to make the decision of, well, I have an injured guy on my team. What is the opportunity cost lost by dropping that guy to gain the potential for the person you're picking up? And that's the challenge that you have to make in season with waiver wire. Is this injured guy going to get healthy? This guy is underperforming on my team. Well, should I cut him? Is the potential gains from the next guy outweighed by losing this guy on the roster, right? That's what you have to make, and it's not about having a player. It's about having a player minus the other decision that you have to make. So we're now in draft season, and when you're going to whatever spot, you're in the 3rd round, 4th round, there's choices. There's hundreds and hundreds of players to take. The question is, if I take a player, who am I passing up on? If you're taking a first baseman, maybe that first baseman has a fantastic value. He's going to hit a lot of homers. He's going to hit a lot of hits, stolen bases. But by taking the first baseman, it means I'm not going to take a different first baseman. And that has to factor in if you're deciding between him and a second baseman. Well, I could take this second baseman, but then I might get a different first baseman later. And you really need to piece together your draft and think about, if I don't pick this, what happens? If I do pick this, what happens? Because every roster decision that you make in a draft is not just, do I like the guy or not? Sure, these are all ball players. These are great players. It's about taking somebody and not. So that's the general setup of opportunity cost for you.
Yeah, and that's a very well said. And it starts in the first round. It's way too many conversations go on about players taken in the first round. They're all good. You're setting yourself up good, well, kind of regardless of who you take. It's not going to break you. But one very good example, and we'll get into again how to properly use projections again, not A versus B. And maybe the best way to get into this is Jose Ramirez. Maybe everyone, I think, at this point is pretty much on board with him being like a top 4 player at minimum. He's actually my second player behind Turner, at least in 5x5 roto. He is not the second best projected player because the batting average is kind of not on par with some of the guys you can get there, but he is at third base and he steals bases. Both things that are a little more scarce, especially the combination of a third baseman who steals bases. So you're getting a third base, you're getting a good player to shallow position. You're getting someone who steals base, which is a valuable commodity. And you're actually getting a unicorn in the terms of a consistent player at third base who actually steals bases. So his value rises. Are there several players in the first round that are probably going to outproduce him 1-for-1? Sure. But if you take the combination of drafting him in the first round versus Juan Soto, a fantastic player, versus a outfielder you would get later when you eventually take a third baseman, the combination of J-Ram and that other outfielder probably ends up as a net positive versus Soto and the other third baseman. So that's a good way of generally summing up from the get-go. because a lot of people take Jose Ramirez, they realize why it's an important thing, but you don't realize how many things actually go into the decision, because a lot of sharp people even say ignore ADP. That's You say that, but everyone uses ADP. You see it. It affects you. Um, just look at drafts early in the season without ADP versus later. There's a tight min max, especially early in drafts when there's an actually established ADP. Even if you think you're being a renegade and ignoring it, it still is working on your mind. It keeps a certain order to things. So it's always good to kind of use ADP to your advantage as well. So getting into that. What do you think is the best way to use popular projection systems? Yours, ATC, is fantastic, but it's even, you would say, you don't use it like in order. You don't just draft people in the order of like auction value cost. There's decisions to be made, and the same thing with ADP. How can you take that like in a roster construction opportunity cost standpoint to maybe use the information that is popularly out there, the ATC, the BAT, Steamer, and then the established ADP, and kind of use that against your opponents in order to, kind of maybe take advantage of that opportunity cost roster construction to your advantage?
Yeah, so ADP, I mean, you see it, you say it affects you. It doesn't really affect my decision of whether I like a player or not, or whether I think a player is worth a value or not.
It's more of, I meant it kind of like controls the flow of the draft more than people, I think, give it credit for.
To me, it's more of a preparation tool. I mean, I get often like asked the question, "Do you use ADP?" And in snake drafts, and I basically say, in the first 4 rounds, I don't look at ADP at all. Right? I'm just taking my best available player, or I'm taking the players that I think are gonna produce the best path for me to getting value throughout the rest of the draft. In the end of the draft, I'm taking whoever I want. I don't look at ADP at all. In the middle, I look at it a little bit in draft just to say, okay, well, this player ATC values quite a bit more than the market. Do I have room to wait a round or not? Because obviously, if I can get the same player 2 rounds later, it's my advantage not to take him now, even though I think he's better, right? But I use ADP more as, and by the way, all the things I described there, those are what's called tactics. Those are in draft things when you're in the middle of doing the game. The strategy part to me is more important, because when I'm building what I think I'm going to take players, I'm looking at ADP. Okay, if first baseman appears to be a bargain according to ATC projections, ATC compared to the market, that might guide me and say, you know what? I don't have to take Freddie Freeman up above, because Freddie Freeman is going roughly where he should value-wise. But maybe there's a guy down low in the first baseman area that maybe CJ Cron or Bobby Dahlbeck, if you will, that actually it's a pretty big bargain. I might not have to take Freddie Freeman because I'm going to get a bigger bargain there. So why use the first base position to do that? Right? It gives me a guide to what to do. I use it to find what I call hotspots. Where are there pockets of players that are similar position or similar statistics that are bargains? And that's where I want to map out, oh, there's some great second baseman in the 8th round. There's some speed in the 11th round that are bargains, right? I map out where I think I'm going to get the players, so I have a roadmap of what I want to do during the draft. And then, up top, okay, if I know I'm taking these players, or I'm going to try to take these players in the 8th, 9th, and 10th rounds, I know to counteract it by taking a certain type of player in the first 4 rounds, right?
Yep.
In auctions, it guides me in terms of what I think I'm going to bid. If the players who are $40 are going for $50, I'm not going to buy those. But if I find pockets of, oh, look at these guys who I value at 20, they're only going for 14. Oh, I think I'm going to play here. I'm going to buy 2 players of that value. Right? It guides me as to where I think I'm going to play, so I better prepare myself as to what I'm likely going to do. When I get to it, of course, I have to counter and do the best available, best thing I can do. But it's good to come up with a plan. And that's how I use ADP. And of course, you mentioned projections. Well, projections are how I get the values. If you do an auction, you obviously have to get an auction value. Even if you don't, if you do a snake draft, calculate the auction values, because that will actually show you the relative value between players. Just to have a ranking of the 7th best second baseman is not equivalent to the 7th best third baseman, is not equivalent to the 7th best outfielder. But if you know that, oh, this is an equivalent of $25, oh, this guy's an equivalent of $12, you get a much better feel for how much more valuable a player is than the other. And then you use it and compare it to ADP, and that sets you up for the rest of the draft.
I think, and that is for anyone listening, some of this information may seem obvious or something that you do. I think kind of also a missing part is everyone thinks of roster construction. Everyone thinks of position scarcity in terms of like their own individual strategic like advantage. But I think some people fail to actually put them together in terms of when you are making, again, we'll talk about this briefly because the topic was somewhat annoying over the last week, but the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. discussion, we'll break it down from just a opportunity cost standpoint. The thing is, a lot of people will just take the argument and go Vlad versus the other player, 1 for 1. Of course, Vlad should go in the first round. He's a beast. Look at him. And then they'll look at that. And then someone else will just say something about he doesn't steal bases. And then everyone's like, oh, who cares if he doesn't steal bases? He does everything else really well. You have to look at kind of everything. And what I was saying before with Jose Ramirez is, all right, you're taking Vladimir Guerrero Jr. No one's saying he's bad. If you are, you're goofy. But you take him, you're taking a first baseman without steals. Not saying that he's not worth taking the first round, but if you take him, you have to consider, all right, now I am taking the bargain first basemans off the board. It's a value move you can't make later. Certainly you can fill your corner infield spot. It's probably a good place to do it. But then you have to chase stolen bases. It kind of takes other 0 stolen base guys off the board. People that aren't going to be stealing bags that could be a value later. You're kind of taking them slightly off your board if you need to backfill stolen bases. It just affects everything else you do. So you can build a winning roster with Vladimir Jr. Of course you can. It's just a matter of, you have to say, what is, the end game? What does it add up to? The person you could have taken instead of Vlad plus the later first baseman, or Vlad plus the player you take later. That's what you have to kind of add up. What are your thoughts on that in general? Because it got into a contentious debate. What it turns out is, it depends on how you're comfortable doing, but it's not a matter of, I'm picking him because he's great. It really does set up the rest of your draft. And you kind of have to think of, it really affects what you do on many levels.
Well, I'll try not to be contentious here. I'm a nice guy.
Yeah, you should never be contentious, but it's, Twitter.
I just try to roll with the punches and to be nice. And you know what? I don't mind if people want to debate me and people say I think you're wrong, because I should be able to stand by what my opinions, and I should be able to back up what I want to say. But your point is right about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. When you're making a decision of, do I want to roster him, is how secure do we think his numbers are? How much bigger his numbers are than another person that we're considering? What the difference in position is, what the bargain I can get later in at that position. Where am I going to get the category in rotisserie? You have to worry about the categories, right? If you take Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who might steal 2 bases, you're going to be deficient, and the market is valuing steals very highly. You have to overpay in terms of true value, right? You might have to jump around or two to where a guy is really worth. So, yeah, I mean, if you might be better off, and again, this is for everybody to make the decision on their own. I can guide you. We can all guide you on what goes into it and numerically tell you a couple things, but it's your decision. Bryce Harper, I think, is a better pick than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in the first round of a 15-team league, because Bryce Harper gets you quite a bit of the power, quite a bit of the average, but he also throws in those steals. And you don't have to feel yourself, I got to jump and get a Miles Straw 2 rounds ahead if you have Bryce Harper, because you have the 12 steals. You only need another 15 steals, as opposed to if you've taken Guerrero Jr., that's 0. You have to take Straw. If you take Harper, well, maybe you just get a guy who Max Kepler steals 7 bases. That combination might do it for you, right? So it's about comparing the different things. At some point, though, of course, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be the guy to take. I mean, at a certain point, you say, well, you know what? The value that he brings is worth the deficiency in the category balance. It's worth the deficiency in the risk. It's worth the deficiency in not getting that bargain later. and at a certain point it comes out for you. So I'm not going to say there's a one answer for every person. It depends on your league format, depends on things. If you're in a smaller league, you should be more inclined to take Guerrero Jr., right? If you're in a bigger league, you should be more cognizant of the steals, right? A deeper league, I should say.
Yes.
So all those factors go into it. Depends on the point scoring. If you're in a points league, Guerrero Jr. is much more solid, right? If steals are not an issue, there you go. If it's a league that you're having a certain strategy, maybe you're in a categories league head to head, and your strategy is punt steals. Well, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is enormous. So it depends on the strategy you want to employ, also, right? But you should know the directionally of how things work, and then you make your own inference on where to take him. He's definitely a mid first rounder, early first rounder, I should say. Certainly, I wouldn't pass up on Ramirez, Bichette. I would take Harper over him also. Harper's going a little bit later. I take him earlier,
And yeah, you said format is such a massive thing, especially nowadays with so much information that's out there. So many conversations go on. It's always good to remind everyone when you're having a conversation what the format you're talking. Right now, we're generally talking 5x5, but I mean, I'm in Tout Wars draft and hold OBP. I have the 101 as the champion from last year. I got to pick my surprise, everyone. I'm taking Juan Soto, number 1. It's OBP. I wouldn't do that if it wasn't. He has a massive advantage in OBP. I think his last 2 years, like 490 and 460. It makes a difference. But yeah, to move off of Vlad, and again, there's many ways to do this. And also you have to take a look at the actual inventory of possible options too, because sure, you can take, again, this is Vlad. This is just an example. We'll get to every other position here pretty shortly and give you other examples, but you can take Vlad in the first, and then you can end up with Starling Marte, Whit Merrifield, and then boom, you've taken care of the problem. But by taking Vlad, you forced yourselves into taking those 2 other options.
By the way,
and then
you can practice this. Like if you do mock drafts, or let's say you go on Fantasy Pros, they have like instant mock drafts. Try going on there with the 4th pick, okay, or the 3rd pick, or whatever you think is roughly where people are going to take Vladimir. Try building a team with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. after. Try building it with Bichette. See which one actually is easier to build, and see which one gives you more opportunities to branch out later. See which one lets you get the biggest values later on, and you'll see which one actually works for you. That's really the right way to do it, is to test it on there,
Yeah, because there's the draft goes a million different ways every single time. You want to see the best build you can make consistently, because you don't want to be like, all right, I'll take this player because I'll take this player later. If you are only banking on drafting a specific player later and you don't get him, you're screwed. So make sure that you do have multiple avenues.
Never go for, say, I need a certain player. That is the way to lose instantaneously, really.
It's bad. So getting into other positions using opportunity cost as an example, let's just start with catcher, which is usually boring, but in terms of opportunity cost is actually very interesting. Salvador Perez right now, far and away the number 1 option on most people's rankings because of last year, 48 home runs. He still kept up the average, although he had just like a 40% chase rate, just brutal plate discipline. He's getting a little older. I've seen him go in the mid 2nd. Right now he's going mostly in the 3rd round. You can get some really quality options a couple of rounds later in JT Realmuto, a round later in Will Smith, who I absolutely love. I think that the plate appearance gap will be a lot shorter this year with the National League designated hitter, and Salvador Perez is due for a little regression there. But either way, there's a certain shelf. You have those top 3, and then you kind of have that little Grandal Contreras tier, and then the 2 guys in Ruiz and Stevenson, who a lot of people assume the NLDH will give a nice bump to. And after that, it's pick your poison if you happen to have a favorite, but there's a shelf there, and it's kind of a free for all where I don't actually mind at that point. I like to get someone in the top group, and then I don't even care if I wait for James McCann, but that's personal preference. There's obviously guys I like more than him, but in terms of opportunity costs, I don't necessarily care that much. So what do you think of the catcher position? Do you think in terms of trading in what you can get in other positions, do you think that those top 3 can get it for you? I have a couple of shares of Will Smith, because when he falls, I feel that he is actually my catcher 1. So I guess that falls into not a bias. It's just the way I have it worked out. I love what I saw in the second half last year, and he happens to be going later. But just in terms of those top 3, because they're going significantly earlier than the others, how do you like sacrificing an early pick, even like you need like a 2 catcher format, let's say, because there's a bit difference between 2 catcher and 1 catcher on how you would attack catcher in terms of opportunity cost?
Catcher is one of the most difficult things to talk about with opportunity cost, and especially in a snake draft format. In an auction, it's a little bit easier to do because you don't have to take a catcher in order. You can see where things are in the middle. But when somebody picks Salvador Perez, who's the consensus first pick, you don't know how long after him the next person is going to want to take Real Muto and Smith. You don't know how long after him they're going to go down to Grandal, Contreras, Varsho. You don't know. And that's a little bit of a problem because if you're taking Salvador, let's say, for example, you take Salvador Perez in the 4th round, okay? And the question is that a good pick? The answer really depends on whether everybody else is pushing up catchers more or less. If everyone after the 4th round says, you know what? We're not going to take a single catcher till the 22nd round. Right? Let's say I'm giving you the exaggerated case.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Hypothetical. Then your 4th round Salvador Perez is the worst pick of the draft because you could have had a 2nd round player instead of getting Salvador Perez later or somebody really close later on. I'll do the other side. The other extreme is you take Salvador Perez first. Everyone picks a catcher right after that. Well, you made a really great deal by picking Salvador Perez there, right? So it's very hard because you don't know how long the others are going to wait for catcher, right? It's and there's really no way to know. You can look at ADP and see what people are going. That's a guide. If you know your home league and how catchers go, that's something else, but you really don't know. In a one catcher league, catcher values are, I find, too inflated in leagues where you're almost better off in terms of opportunity cost just punting it and waiting in your last pick, take whatever the dollar catcher is because the catchers aren't going to get pushed up that much if there's only one catcher.
And realistically, from season to season, the difference between the catcher 8 and a waiver catcher could actually be rather small.
Yeah, right. I mean, who cares? Why would I want to take the 6th best catcher when the 12th best catcher is about the same? Like, there's no point in using an in-season draft.
Yeah, like last year you drafted Travis d'Arnaud. Someone else got Elias Diaz off of waivers. Who's laughing?
Yeah, I mean, there's no point in one catcher league. I find that that's the case. In 2 catcher leagues in general, and I find that people don't spend enough on it because remember, when you're buying Salvador Perez, you're actually not buying Salvador Perez's stats. You're buying the privilege of not buying the last catcher, right? If you're in a 15-team 2-catcher league, there's 30 catchers. Salvador Perez is not worth Salvador Perez. It's Salvador Perez minus the 30th catcher. And that 30th catcher really stinks. It's so bad I smell it all the way here from New York. That bumps up what you should pay for him. The opportunity cost of not drafting Salvador Perez is high, right? You should want to grab him more, even though the stats he produces isn't in line. I'm doing a Raz Slam right now, and I have I'm the 11th out of 12th pick for my 2nd round pick, second pick of the 2nd round. I picked Salvador Perez because in that format, I did the math. The bump is enormous for catchers. And I actually have him as
I took Will Smith in the beginning of the 3rd round in that format.
Yeah, I was actually going to take I was going to take the 2nd catcher right after that also in the 3rd round or the 4th round, but somebody just sniped JT Realmuto for me. The thing is that you need to know what the bump is in catcher. I had him ranked as my 8th best overall player when accounting for the position opportunity cost. So I find that it does pay to bump up. Now, the only problem, though, with the catcher, there's a lot of problems here. The other problem with the catcher is if Salvador Perez gets hurt, you're now drawing from the crap of the crap. That's a problem, right? The replacement level is far worse. Like if your first baseman gets injured, all right, you're getting a crappy guy. But if your catcher's injured, you're getting a crappy guy. So it's called profile risk. It's the risk of every time you select a player, if the player gets injured or underperforms, either one, what does that do to your aggregate team's value? It's very high for catchers.
You can't back them up with a quality option because that is a net negative in terms of strategy as well.
Trey Turner has a big profile risk because if Trey Turner goes down and gets injured, your steals are zapped. If Mondesi gets injured, your steals are zapped. If your high-profile catcher that you spent a lot of money for gets injured, your replacement level is much lower than a different option. So there is a little bit of risk to taking catchers early, but it's up to you whether to decide, all right, I'll go with it. Salvador Perez, he pretty much, other than that one issue he had where he hurt his knee, he's pretty stable. He catches as much as he can. He's going to DH a lot. So, my opinion is, again, deeper drafts, you should want to push up catchers higher. No problem if you want to take them in the third, fourth round. Maybe not the third round for Salvador Perez because you're paying a little bit more for what he did last year. But I have no problem if you want to jump up catchers early. In a one-catcher league, my advice to you is it's probably not going to be worth the opportunity cost. Just literally punt and wait and take a guy at the end.
All right. So before we move off the catchers to another position and opportunity cost, a couple of good takeaways. Just to recap what we were saying is you're drafting if you draft a top catcher, you're not doing it to necessarily for just the player. You're doing it for the advantage you get over the rest of the league at a thin position, and you don't necessarily from a strategy standpoint might not be the best to start a run pretty much on any position. But you don't want to be caught at the end of one either. But like Ariel was saying, after Perez goes, you're not sure where the rest of the draft may fall in a standard snake league. That's actually why I've fallen into a high percentage share of Will Smith or Ruiz and Stevenson, because there's two tiers for me where most people have Smith as the catcher 3. After Perez goes, if Real Muto, Smith, if they fall, then I will gladly take Smith because he could end up being a value for me. Otherwise, I'll wait, and then I'll end up taking Ruiz or Stevenson because that's the end of a giant tier for before a drop off for me, a cliff. And you can kind of see how it's going. So yeah, it's definitely a position that you got to see how the draft is going. A lot of people always ask me, someone asked me this morning, cause I posted the Raz Slam draft where I took Smith in the 3rd. I said, what's a good ADP, a good round to take him in 5x5? I'm like, I can't really answer that because it depends on how your draft is going. And it's pretty much the conversation we're having now. Completely depends. I could say you could take him in the 5th or 6th round, but I don't want to just lock that in case someone else fell, in case, catchers aren't going, in case they are going. It just depends. So that was catcher. Let's move on to shortstop because this is another position I think is interesting because a lot of people say third base is a cesspool and that shortstop is incredibly deep, where I kind of disagree on both to the phrasing of it. We'll start with shortstop. I don't think it's deep. I think it's top heavy because, and in terms of that, I don't mean that there's few players. There's actually a lot of good shortstops, but in we're not talking auction, we're talking snake draft. There are a bunch of them, but they all go early. There's no waiting on a shortstop. A deep position to me defines that you can pass on one to take one later. You can't do that at shortstop. Everyone's taking them early. By the time you get to, I think the last ones I really want to start are like Dansby Swanson and Willie Adames, and that's pretty early for the last of the last that I'm really, kind of comfortable starting. So all the good ones go like first 5 rounds. So yeah, there's a lot of great ones, but they go quickly. So how do you like to deal with shortstop as far as opportunity cost there? Is this something where you feel like it's just something you got to jump early, or how would you like to deal with it? Because it's an interesting position in general because a 1 second, there's a ton of options on the board, and by the time it comes back around to you, poof, the shelves are bare.
Yeah, so you really can't talk about the shortstop position in terms of how do you want to handle it without talking about the other positions, because every choice you make about whether you take a shortstop or not depends on what the rest of the player pool looks like elsewhere. At the very, very bottom, like you talked about top heavy, deep, at the very, very bottom, because of the utility slot that you're allowed to take any position, the very last player really doesn't matter much between a shortstop, whether he's a second baseman, first baseman. They're all roughly equivalent value. This is very different from about 8-10 years ago, where legitimately middle infield was weaker at the very bottom, and you're taking a crappier player with your last pick. It's not true now. All the positions are pretty much the same. But let's take a look at in terms of somewhere in the middle. So here's what I did for you. I got what ATC deems as a $25, 20, 15, 10, and 5 auction equivalent to a draft, right? Value. And I just checked at what, at each price point, how many second basemen, how many third basemen are available above that price point. For $25 players, there are 3 first basemen, 3 third basemen, 2 second basemen, 4 shortstops. I'd say 12 outfielders, although remember you have to take 5 outfielders. So, and of course, you take like 1.5 first and second or baseman. So the equivalent number would be about 4. So at the very, very top, it really doesn't matter. They're all, there's just about the same number of first baseman, second baseman, third baseman. When you go to the $20 range, there are only 4 third basemen, but there are 9 shortstops. So if you want somebody in that upper middle tier, there's plenty of shortstops. You can actually wait a round or two somewhere in the middle to get a shortstop. Like, what's the difference between Trevor Story, Corey Seager, Francisco Lindor, Carlos Correa? There's actually not that much of a difference. So because you have more options there, in general, you might want to, somewhere in the middle, take a different position, because the following round you can take a similar shortstop, right? The drop in the middle is not that bad. When you go third baseman, of course, is the opposite. There's only 4 of them, 4 versus 9. Third baseman, if you want somebody who's good, you got to take him right away, right? If you leave without getting a Devers or Jose Ramirez or Machado, you're not going to get a good third baseman. When you go down a little bit more, you see some of the same things. At the $15 level, there's 8 third basemen, there's 11 second basemen, 14 shortstops, 9 equivalent outfielders. Outfielder getting a little bit thin, right? It's even worse at the $10 level. It would be shortstops. There's 21 of them. Outfielders only 15. Third baseman 15. It's very, very thin. Shortstop is really deep. You can wait on shortstops along the way. First baseman are then get plentiful. Like it stops going, and then it gets very plentiful at the bottom. There are a lot of $5 to $10 first baseman. There are 30 first basemen worth 5 or more. That's even deeper than shortstop. So shortstop starts in the middle, goes there, and then first baseman gets really deep. So if you really want to play the value game, wait for a shortstop to some of the middle rounds. Second baseman, get somewhere in the middle of the way. Third baseman, go early. And first baseman, you can actually play the really, really cheap game, especially with the corner infielder. You should play the really cheap game. Outfielder, very, very, very thin. You should not wait on getting your 5 outfielders. You should get them much quicker than you think. Don't rely and say, well, there's so many of them. But actually, there aren't. More than ever, there's platooning, right? People are being platooned. They only get half the at-bats, 2/3 the at-bats. That's going on more and more. So outfield is in a 15-team league. Very, very thin. Do not wait on outfielders. That's why I see the player pool. And that's what I'm going to do for shortstop. I'm going to basically just wait and get something in the middle. I'll get the last one of a tier. I don't mind.
How do you judge that when in regards to a second baseman? I don't know if you did. I mean, what you just did on shortstop is very in depth. So I don't know if you did have something similar for second base. For me, it seems like it's a position I hate to get stuck on, but I feel like I love waiting there because the early, Trey Turner's at the very top, and then Ozzie Albies is kind of alone in the second round. Then you got Whit Merrifield and Marcus Semien, but because I guess there's objective reasons for moving around player value, like Semien is pull heavyweights going to Texas, and you can see if he's going to continue to run as much and things like that. But in terms of looking at possible outcomes, I can see him and like a Brandon Lau being pretty similar if Semien doesn't run a ton, to be honest. And you have the players like Jorge Polanco, who is obviously second short, and then you go all the way out to like a guy like Jonathan India, which is kind of where I would like to get my starter in general. There's this big group back there of India and Altuve and Brandon Lau, and there's just this whole kind of clump going in the back. Do you see any advantage other than the obvious of taking Trey Turner? Overall, do you see a big need to take like the Albies or Merrifield? Not saying they don't deserve to be 2 and 3, or Semien, if you believe in him keeping his skills, but is that a position where you feel that it is beneficial to take one of the earlier ones? Because I kind of that's one of the spots I like to wait and take from that large group I mentioned.
No, I don't see a benefit. Trey Turner is different because categorically he's just very, very far superior than anybody else. But there's a whole group from Semien, Lau, Altuve, Baez, Ketel Marte, India. There's so many. I left off 3 of them. There's so many interchangeable ones. And also the thing about second baseman is there are very few pure second basemen. Almost every single second baseman qualifies at another position. So you can wait on second base and just put it somewhere. Remember, if you price things correctly as a $20 player, then it doesn't really matter if you get a $20 shortstop and a $5 second baseman, or a $20 second baseman and a $5 shortstop. So there's just a lot, and it's not as deep as second base. I'm sorry, it's not as deep as shortstop, but it's still deeper than the other positions, which is the key. It's relative to the other positions. So you can wait and get value later on. There's no need to whip up a top pick, which again, third base is much, much more shallow. I'd rather whip up the third baseman earlier on and get the second baseman when there's second baseman aplenty somewhere in the middle for good value.
All right, let's skip first base for a second. Let's go to third base because we've mentioned it a couple of times here, and both talking about second and shortstop. I agree. Like I said before, a lot of people have literally used the word cesspool, and I don't know if it's necessarily there are very few good third basemen. I think the term to say, or the way to say it, is there's very few third basemen you can rely on. There's plenty of really interesting third basemen late. The question marks are just aplenty, though, on whether it's injuries or a Eugenio Suarez coming off a down year, a Jan Moncada, Matt Chapman. There's lots of guys that theoretically you could see bouncing back and having a monster season, but there's a massive risk in all of those. You mentioned the obvious, the J Ram, the Machado, the Devers. After that, you got like Austin Riley. And then you have that kind of tier of, I don't know what to do, like Bregman and Rendon. They kind of have their own question marks too. And right in the middle there is Nolan Arenado, where his profile isn't necessarily much better than too many of the guys going behind him. Actually in the By the Numbers article, I compared him with Josh Donaldson. We know the reasons why he's going late. He's not the bringer of rain as much as the bringer of calf tightness at this point. But if he gets enough games, he could certainly match Arenado pretty easily. So just in terms of Arenado as an interesting person, where I see him bounce around a lot, where do you kind of have him? Because he's going early enough where you really do have an interesting opportunity cost, where you're passing up on a lot of interesting options to take him. Whereas I don't think his ceiling is like very likely to be surpassed by at least a few options behind him. The gamble is you don't know who the heck they're going to be in a draft, so you can easily strike out on that. So yeah, what are your thoughts on Arenado? Because I kind of single him out as someone where, as far as opportunity cost, which we're talking about, he's an interesting player.
I mean, you never want to feel that you have to take a guy because the position is thin. It's just if the position is thin, if there's no replacement level adjustment, which I'm telling you there isn't, meaning a $1 third baseman is same as a $1 second baseman. So if all else fails, just take the last third baseman and you'll be okay, right? It's not a catcher, right? And it's going to be better than an outfielder because the outfielders have the platoon issues. So if you get a guy who has a job and he's valued at the very bottom in your player pool, I'm fine with taking that as third baseman. I don't need to push up value to get Arenado.
Well, I guess if I can add something to you, so you can talk about it too with your answer, then where is there a spot where you're like, okay, I don't have my third baseman yet? Like if it just hasn't happened that way, is this a position where you're kind of just willing to literally just wait? Or is there options in the middle where that you prefer, that you think deserve to be more towards the top than they are? Like there's always the Justin Turners of the world that seem to get disrespected, or is, like you said, is this just something where you'd rather just, if you don't get, even though it's shallow, is it just one of those things where if you don't get the guy you like early, do you just wait?
I mean, there are a few third basemen that I think are undervalued at where they're going. Ryan McMahon is an undervalued player, according to me. Josh Donaldson is a little bit undervalued, and Justin Turner is always undervalued, right? So there are spots that you get an undervaluing, but I don't think you have to feel that you have to take somebody who's mediocre just to say, I don't want to get the 12th best third baseman. I want a top 8. Do not think you have to do that. It is an advantage to get a top one this year, as I've mentioned. Like getting the Rafael Devers is much better because there are more bargains in other positions. There aren't a lot of bargains in third base. So by getting the guy for par value up top in Devers sets you up earlier. So I would push myself an extra pick or two for the third baseman up top. But once that passes, then you just say, just unbutton my belt and let it fly. To use an analogy there. Sure. I mean, if I like Ryan McMahon and McMahon comes up as a bargain later on, okay, great. That guy satisfies third base. I'll take him for a bargain. Otherwise, if I don't see one, I'm not going to take a guy, and I'm fine with taking the last third baseman. You're going to have at some point in the game, you're going to take the last something, right? You're going to have one part of your roster that's like, well, it's not the best guy. So if it's third base, it's third base. I think that's totally fine.
I'm looking up a player because I want to see how ATC judges him before I actually see what I'm going to say.
Sure.
Well, actually, I'll tell the player straight up right now in terms of some of those guys. Like I love Yohan Moncada.
I hate Yohan Moncada. Why do
hold
you
on,
like Yohan Moncada? I don't hate him. I like the person. I don't.
This isn't the player
like
I'm bringing up.
fantasy
I'm
guy.
bringing him up to compare him to the other player I'm going to bring up. So I do love Yohan Moncada in terms of you look at his skills, and I'm always looking at him like, why isn't there an MVP have broken out here? You look at what he's did in the minors. You look at his batted ball skills. You look at his high BABIP profile, hitting line drives and being fast, even though he doesn't steal bases. And I'm just wondering why he doesn't do better. But I will say, instead
Maybe
of
because he's not as good. I mean, I think that Moncada has been a bust from a fantasy standpoint for a long time. There was one season where he had over $10 worth of roto value. Sorry, one season where he had more than $8 worth of roto value. Yet people keep taking him higher and higher. This year, his price has gone down. Maybe he's par value this year, I think.
The reason I bring him up, even though I like him, he's going at pick 152. And this is what we're talking about in terms of if you don't get the third baseman you want, wait. I don't think there's going to be unless we see the massive breakout that many are hoping for, there's not a huge difference between him and pick 400 Evan Longoria. There's not. I mean, Longoria, there's plenty of reasons why he's going late. The Giants like to do weird stuff with the bats. He's a little older. He's not as bad as you think. But in terms of you're just saying, like, just wait to the very end. And in terms of like 12-team leagues, he probably won't even be drafted. But in 15-team leagues, projected about 252, 17 home runs, a couple of bags. Moncada, 260, 19 home runs, 4 bags. It's kind of the same player.
In theory, I agree with you. Evan Longoria, particularly though, has
it's more of an extreme. Like I tried to pick someone like the most extreme back end third baseman.
Well, he has a similar profile categorically, but I mean, sure. I have no problem taking Evan Longoria as my last player in a 15-team league. The problem is though he's on the Giants, so he's going to platoon. He also is older. He's 36 years old. It's going to be this year. So, he's not fantastic from that standpoint, but your point is valid. Like there's no reason to spend such a high thing on Moncada if there is a similarly profiled player a little bit later on. That piece of advice is totally true.
Yeah, and then like we're saying in around pick 150, what are you passing up on at other positions? Again, this is apples to apples. Those are just for some reason, Longoria jumped in my head because I knew he was going late.
Yeah, you're passing up on a lot. There's no need to push. There's no need to push anything. Yes. People have the oh my god, what am I going to do at third base? So you got a crappy third baseman. Like that's you're not going to win this game by panicking. Here's how to win fantasy baseball. Don't be in a position anywhere where you're going to panic, right?
Yes.
Set yourself up in the first couple of rounds so that you have much more choices of who you're going to take, and don't come into a position where you say, I got to take this guy now. If you're in that position, it means you're giving away value, and that's how to play it.
I mean, yeah, 150. Instead of going with a Moncada, you're weak at starting pitching. This isn't me trying to push anything on anyone, but I mean, you could be getting like Nate Eovaldi, Sean Manaea, Luis Garcia, Eduardo Rodriguez. That's a decent tier of getting your SP like 3, probably your SP3 around then. That's a much better plan just for one, specific example there. Going back to first base, and that was. And
by the way, you mentioned you rattled off 3 pitchers in a row going similarly valued. That's what I would call a hot spot. You've identified that at that spot, there's 3 good guys that are worth it. And here's the nice thing. The nice thing about the hot spot, and this is important, when you identify 3 or 4 players that have same specs, same position roughly, and they're not overpriced, right? They're a slight bargain or so. It's possible that if any one of those players, let's say somebody loves Eovaldi, he can jump him up around. it's possible that somebody else won't like him. But the probability that all 4 guys are going to be all jumped up on ADP, which is an average across leagues, is very, very low. Like, there is a very, very high percentage chance you'll get somebody from that group at that price, or even lower, by the way, right? Because ADP is an average. You can get a guy later, right? But you'll at least get one. And so if you identify pockets of 3 or 4, the more players you put in the group, the higher probability is you're going to be able to get that value. And that's why it's very important in prep to find those pockets called hotspots.
And that was third base, and again, this perfect. Again, that's why knowing the player pool, which we could stop the show, knowing the player pool, and you can do this by a lot of different ways. Just drafting is the best way. You can do mock drafts. Real drafts are better. If you want to jump into even like a draft champions or a best ball, something where you have to maybe do in-season management. It's just good to get your eyes on the player pool and get comfortable with where, and that's the best way to know where to find these pockets. First base, we've mentioned a lot, and this is a position I think me and Ariel love to wait on. From an opportunity cost standpoint is actually hilarious because there's like several mini tiers where you have to make a decision. Like, sorry, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., we already talked about. He's in a tier by himself in round 1. What do you have to give up in order to draft him? Should I just wait till round 2 to draft Freddie Freeman, who's kind of in a tier by himself in round 2? What do you have to give up in order to get him? Or should I wait for the tier 3 where Goldschmidt, Olsen, and Alonso are waiting? Alonso kind of underrated a little bit, but still going significantly earlier with the rest. But what are you giving up to take one of them? Should you just wait to Jose Abreu, who's kind of in his own little mini tier by himself? Or do you wait for the glob of talent, like several picks, several rounds later, where you have the Reese Hoskins, the Josh Bells, the Jared Walsh, CJ Crone, Trey Mancini? It goes on and on. I love Josh Bell personally, but there's just so many. So there's so many different levels of opportunity cost decisions you have to make. But for me, it all lands with, I love the group of later guys, so I will tend to wait. I have a share of Matt Olson. I have a share of Paul Goldschmidt. I like what they do. You just kind of have to determine how the draft's going and kind of what you want to do. I do a lot of drafts though, so diversifying shares also comes into this, but not everyone plays in a million leagues, so we won't get too much into that. But yeah, what do you think about first base? Because like I said, it is complicated because there's several stops along the way where you can kind of make a decision of, all right, do I like where the player going? And it really depends on your draft in case any of these guys are falling as well.
Yeah. So again, I think more in terms of auction dollars, and you should also, rather than rounds. But there are a lot of somewhere between first baseman number, let's say 16 and 30. There are a lot of very undervalued first basemen by like around $5 in auction value, right? There's so many there. And the magic number there is around 5. You're almost bound to get a bargain of $5 or more if you wait that long. I mean, Trey Mancini, Rizzo, Jonathan Scope, Nate Nathaniel Lowe, Sano, terrible batting average, but he's a bargain. Belt. There's just so many guys that are going later than they probably should statistically for whatever
even the bottom
reason,
of the barrel, like Aguilar and Tellez, or for where they're going.
Yes, Aguilar, Tellez, Christian Walker, Bobby Dahlbeck, if you will. You mean Yuli Gurriel, although he's going higher than he used to go even lower. Because of that you know you're going to get a couple round bargain. You know you're going to get a $5 bargain or whatever it is. The question is, should I take Freddie Freeman up top, right? Because Freddie Freeman is a fantastic player, super safe. He steals a little bit, batting average, right? You're not going to say, wow, I can't believe I got Freddie Freeman. Crap, right? He's excellent. The question is, what bargain do you need to make on Freddie Freeman in order to say, okay, I'll take the Freddie Freeman here, even if it's just a little bit overpriced, to give up the bargain later, right? That's the determination you have to make. If you're up to Jose Abreu and he's going a couple dollars less, half a round, well, you can get a half a round bargain on Jose Abreu. If you give that up, you can probably get a 3-round bargain on somebody else later on. So that's really the question you need to go. And at a certain point, he's going to drop far enough where you'll say, what the heck? I'll just take this, round and a half value on Jose Abreu. That's going to be more than getting whatever it is on a crappier player. But if it's par value, if you're getting Jose Abreu at where he should go, well, then you're giving up a bargain. So you always have to make that, it's opportunity cost, right? I'm giving up a potential bargain later. So what kind of bargain do I need to give up top? And for me, I find Jose Abreu this year that the answer is no. Usually I've been taking him the last 5 years in a row, but not this year. I don't think he's a bargain. Matt Olson, Pete Alonso, Goldschmidt, depends on every draft. I've drafted Olson. Some of them, Pete Alonso goes early third round. No, I don't want to take.
It's kind of like catcher, right? It's that 3 group. It's kind of like when Sal goes, when do the other 2 go? And these guys can go in any order. If once one goes, the other 2 seem to go typically, but it ranges so much.
Yeah. The point is that if they fall far enough, then it's worth jumping in that tier. And from practice for myself, I find that if yes or no, like I've seen drafts where it makes sense to take him, and where it's no, he doesn't. So you don't know what you don't know what you're going to get until you get into the draft. I found that Ryan Mountcastle usually is a bargain. He goes a little bit later than he should, right? So you plan out, and if you take a look at how people are drafting, you can get a feel for what's the probability I'm going to get a bargain somewhere, and then you can map out what you really think you're going to get. Jake Cronenworth, DJ LeMahieu, that area, I don't think you're getting a bargain. Votto, you're paying for last year's great production. So that tier, I think you're not getting a bargain. I wouldn't overpay for that. You pick your spots on where you're going to go. So far, I found myself maybe getting a Goldschmidt, Alonso, Olson. Otherwise, I'm dropping pretty much far down to the tier of Scope, Nathaniel Lowe, or even lower to the Aguiar tier that you mentioned. That's how I've seen it this year.
So, I mean, first base is the best possible discussion for opportunity cost, because we mentioned the conversation in the beginning with Vlad is an extreme, taking whether or not to take Freeman, because there's so many, like you pass on Vlad because you like that tier of Goldschmidt, Olson, and Alonso. If you don't get the value you're searching for, there was such a big tier before, because we're saying like, you're not boxing yourself in. You're like, I have to take I'm waiting for this one guy. There's so many. So that's why it makes it's such a default area where it's easy to make that decision.
Yeah, you should come to the draft and say, don't I have to take one of these guys? Take if it drops to X level. If it goes to 4th round, then take. And then you have your plan B. If you pass, take this group if it drops to this level, and just set points for each tier as, okay, I'll take one if it drops to this. If not, just remember, you can always get the last person in the draft. That's always a possibility. You can take 3 first basemen. You can take 2 first basemen and a third baseman as your last 3 picks. You could. It's possible.
Yep. And that was first base. Talk about outfield here shortly. There's too many outfielders, so I kind of narrowed this down into my discount doppelgangers that I've been doing my series on. I'm going to name 3 players. There's an obvious reason one player is being drafted in front of the other, due to upside and safety and other things. But in the end, I wouldn't be shocked if it shook out that all players were kind of close in terms of overall 5x5 value. And those 3 players are Randy Arozarena being the premier guy, Trent Grisham being the middle tier, and then Robbie Grossman being the later tier. Randy Arozarena obviously has the highest ceiling. We could see him breaking out. The underlying peripherals suggest that may not happen. He could actually get a little worse, but again, he does have the ceiling. Trent Grisham, everyone believes in what happened in 2020. He was injured a lot last year. We could see a bounce back there. There's a reason he's being drafted where he is. And then Robbie Grossman, lack of track record. We don't know if he'll continue to do certain things. Did he just have a career year? But in terms of actual theoretical production and projections, they're kind of similar players. So in terms of opportunity costs, I just bring up these 3 where I guess I want to get your opinion, Ariel, on, this kind of, you can do this with anyone. You can do it with different statistics. These guys happen to be 2020-ish guys, so I picked them as an example. But what are your thoughts on these guys? Because they're going very far apart in snake drafts. But like I said, there's certainly a narrative where they could all shake out very similarly.
Yeah. So as far as those 3 go, Arozarena, Grisham, and Grossman. So here are my thoughts on them. Which one? Let me ask you, which one you think has the highest projected batting average of the 3?
Oh, batting average, I would say probably Arozarena.
Correct. It is Arozarena. Which one has the highest projected strikeout rate?
Jeez.
or historical strikeout rate, same thing.
I probably, I don't mean, probably Rosarina still.
It's a Rosarina. So he's got the highest batting average, but the highest projected strikeouts. Something doesn't seem right, right? I think I do not really fully believe in a Rosarina as far as batting average, because that strikeout rate. I mean, he had a 28% strikeout rate last year, 29% strikeout rate in 2020. That's a lot. Um, that really tells me that Trent Grisham, who, you know, we're talking a 250s average. I mean, a Rosarina, it's not going to be all that far away. We're talking maybe 10 points away at best. I think that a Rosarina is a little bit more risky than most, and he's going ridiculously early. He's going in the 4th round. I think that's way too high for his value. Trent Grisham, to me, is fairly priced. I think he has potential to be better. Remember, projections are going on what he did last year, and he was great for the first month. And then he stunk. Projections take into account all of that. And I think the stunk part was more injury related than anything else. I think the Padres like him, and they want to put him as the leadoff batter. He's going to get a lot of runs when you're batting in front of those Machado and Tatis guys. So I kind of like Grisham as a big runs guy. You know, in 2020, he was on pace for 113 runs. This guy is going to score. Robbie Grossman, I think, had a career season last year where he was 23-20 in terms of homers and steals. Could he do that again? Sure. Odds are at age 32, he won't. He does have a very good on-base percentage. He walks at a 13% rate. Last year was 15%. That's a very high thing. And his strikeout rate is projected to be about 21%. So, yeah, he's going to play. I think the team is going to improve. I think he's still going to return a good value. But is it going to be an $18 value like last year, or is it going to be like his projected $8 or $9 value this year? Probably. So between the three, I kind of like Grisham for value. But Grossman is a good option if you get to that point and he flies. He's going the 12th round. I think I'd buy him somewhere in the 13th or 14th. He's an outfield and he gets steals. He tackles a lot of different categories. So he's not a bad pick. A Rosarina is just too high priced for me. I think you're giving up a good 4th round pick that you could use elsewhere.
Yeah, I think and in terms of thought process, if you're thinking an opportunity cost, it comes to a Rosarina. I think we agree. Looking at what is available later, he's a pass. Grisham is a depends on what else you need, what else is going on. I think my conclusion when comparing Grisham and Grossman in my article was, why not both? If Grossman's going late enough, where if he went 15-15, he doesn't need to give you what you did last year. He could still give you value where he goes. So yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question? What's your take on Jazz Chisholm? Because Jazz Chisholm, look at his statistics. It's not all that different from, let's say, Grisham or Grossman or any one of those guys, right? He's going the 5th round. Why would you take Chisholm when you can get Robbie Grossman a good 7-8 rounds later?
Yeah, I've said this a lot on my different shows. Chaz Chisholm is just someone I don't want to say he's off my board, but I think he is. He is young, and I always say his biggest flaw is always showcased as a plus when they show that Jacob deGrom fastball. I always say this guy's the Kit Keller of fantasy baseball. He chases high fastballs in a bad way. I think that there's more of a chance of him taking a step backward than a step forward. I would think from a dynasty standpoint, you're hoping to see incremental improvement in his plate discipline rather than a breakout this year. If you want to take a shot on a rookie or a sophomore player or something, do it later. I always say O'Neal Cruz is being drafted based on one batted ball event. He struck out 40% of the time when he came up, and he hit one ball 119 miles per hour. I don't necessarily think he's in the Pirates opening.
119? We got to buy him now. Buy him in early rounds.
No, it's seriously like one batted ball event. If he was in the opening day lineup, I like his chances as much as Jazz's though. But for me, I'll wait on the unproven stuff. I'm not worried about. I mean, if Riley Green makes the Tigers lineup, I see no reason why he can't rival these guys' production. So yeah, as Jazz, I'm off of that.
Right. Okay. Good.
I'll take the sure stuff.
Good. We agree.
Starting pitching, we've kind of talked about the entire time, but I wanted, before we got out of here, I want to talk about closers because it's been kind of insane. With at least this is different though, because NFBC is its own animal. and early drafts are more draft and holds. So for anyone who hasn't played in them, you're drafting with people are drafting over 700 players, and there's no waiver wire. So you have to draft saves because they're a category, and there is no going back for them. So there is a premium on people have a job. Once jobs are known and the lockout ends, it'll normalize somewhat. I still think the elite guys will be going earlier in fab leagues or waiver leagues. You can get that on the waiver wire, even though it's expensive, and you can afford to move around. So this is very format dependent. But as far as early closers go so far, it has been one of those things where Hader and Hendricks go, and then there's kind of a waiting game to see who's going to start the overflow of the following tiers. And a lot of them were taken rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's like there's just overrun, and by like round 8, Barlow and Knable and everyone, is kind of gone, and you're kind of waiting for the David Bednars of the world. So how do you feel about how closers are going? Again, you kind of are forced into it somewhat in draft and holds because you got to get someone, at least one. It depends on where it goes, but yeah, how do you attack saves this year with opportunity cost in mind? And I guess we kind of have to frame this for a couple different formats.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger issue is the lockout with closers, is that we don't really know the situation on a lot of bullpens. We haven't seen spring training, and the uncertainty factor is at an all-time high on closers. Of course, we know there's closer by committees, right? So getting a lockdown closer and knowing who it is so hard. And so what the draft champion people were doing is what you're mentioning is, well, there's no waiver wires, so I got to take Liam Hendricks, even if I have to get him in the second round, because I need a closer, and he's a closer, and I don't know about anybody. The Blue Jays Jordan Romano, who knows? It could be Kenley Jansen signing with them tomorrow. Ian Kennedy can sign. Who knows if Barlow's going to be the closer?
Ian Kennedy is going to steal someone's job. It's a guarantee. It happens every year.
Rich Rodriguez is still out there. He closed games for Pittsburgh. There's a lot of closers. There's a lot of relief pitchers left to sign, and people lose their job faster than they can shell out pancakes at IHOP. So it's a whole thing there. There's pluses situations. Boston, is it Whitlock? What's the other? Is it Matt Barnes? There's a lot of situations you don't know about. So the paying for certainty in a non-waiver wire league, I understand. If you're in a waiver wire league, you have to now calculate the opportunity cost of how much fab are you going to be allocating to getting saves. You could also punt saves, right? That could be a decision. But assuming you want to get saves and be in the mix, you have draft capital and you have fab capital, and you have to decide what the best use of it is. Is it take a shot on a cheap closer? Is it go for a really expensive one? It's very hard for me to give an overarching answer because it really depends on what your league does and the opportunity cost in your own league. But in general, I found myself in general buying one of the more secure closers. I think the Hader and Hendricks price is ungodly right now. I mean, that's just insane. You're passing up on a second round batter. He'll never come close to earning the value there. Like, I'd rather take 2 shots at a guy in the bottom, give you 50% chance of getting a save situation than spending a second round pick. But yeah,
I do prefer to. I don't have Hendricks or Hader this year. Last year I did. I do see the advantage of, and something that some people tend to overlook, which I don't see how the heck you can. I love the guys that can give you the 90, 100 strikeouts and the ratios and saves, because at a certain point, people are, again, I can't even insult him because everyone knows how good he is. I just questioned the decision. Phil Dussault took Will Smith, Atlanta, in the 3rd round, I believe. I'm not doing that. I don't like saves enough to do that, just because I would rather, there's other pitchers where I think that I'm not only can I get saves, I can get elite strikeouts and other things. So I guess that's where it kind of depends for me. I've been getting a lot of Kenley Jansen early because I like him to get me all those other things I talked about, but he doesn't have a job. So he kind of has this shadow discount where once he signs, he'll probably shoot up. So I've been kind of having him fall. Plus he happens to be just kind of going at the end there. But so I do think
there's a lot
there's
of ways to play it. There's a lot of
Yeah,
ways to play the closer wire. I think that the best thing you can do is analyze the team situations and see what the overall cost for locking that down. Like, if you look at Boston, I'm pretty sure it's Whitlock or Barnes. I'm pretty sure it's one of those two. Don't think Boston's going to get another closer. I don't think so. They haven't in the past. And they're not even re-signing Ottavino. So, I think it's one of them. Whitlock, even if he doesn't close, he's still a valuable pitcher. He earned $12 last year in rotisserie formats, and he wasn't really the closer. And there's word that he might even be turned into a starter. So that's an interesting situation. Minnesota, I don't think they're buying a closer. Taylor Rogers, probably going cheaper than he should be. That's a good situation. You can back him up with Jorge Alcala for nothing right now. So there are situations that I like. If I knew that Toronto wasn't going to get somebody, that Jordan Romano is a fantastic pick right there, right? If you told me we're not going to get anybody, that's the pick. You can get him and get him and Kennedy just in case. You could do that. You can double down on things, on situations. There's a lot of ways to play it. You make the best decision out of the money. The top two are just insanely priced. And I actually think that like Iglesias, Presley, they're also very, very, they're very expensive. Class A is wonderful. I don't know. Can you throw 100 miles an hour and not have your arm fall off? So far, you got DeGrom with issues. You got Jordan Hicks last year with issues. He scares me. He's the right guy if he's healthy, for sure. He scares me. So, you do your best to find the situation that you like at a reasonable cost and go for it.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot to do with what's going on with the rest of your draft too. Because I've seen some where it's ridiculously aggressive, and some where they let them slip a little more. Like you said, it kind of all depends. I like the idea of doing those combinations that you had said of of trying to tag team people. I know I have a couple of Lucas Sims and Art Warren. I think that's nice. Art Warren was just kind of solid on his own. I like building out some of those middle relievers. You were kind of saying Garrett Whitlock, ID people that even if they don't get saves, they're still valuable. That's why I like the Jonathan Loizaga, who certainly has injury issues, but there's plenty of guys like that as well, where you can kind of get them where they can still give you plenty of value. And in deeper formats, you can always try to, even though there's not necessarily a big path to saves unless there's an injury. Trevor May, vast discount because he had an off season, but still he's someone who's probably going to give you a ton of strikeouts, and could have a boost in value. And in draft and holds, you can use him from here and there. Waiver
I had
leagues.
Trevor May came on my podcast this year. He is he's a go-getter. He's like, I'm pitching the 8th or the 9th, buddy. And I'd rather have the 9th.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to go about that. So, I mean, that finishes up our conversation on opportunity cost. Know the player pool. Think multiple things ahead, because you don't, we're trying to say, do not compare players apples to apples for projections purposes. Just because one player is definitely projected to do better in 5x5 than another, you have to look at position scarcity. You have to look at statistical scarcity in categories. You have to look at what you can get later in the draft, how your draft is going. So when we say opportunity cost, look at, you make a decision, look what you're giving up, and what you're giving up, how can you rectify that later? And can you, by you filling that need later, is that plus the move you're doing now a net positive versus what you should be doing? Think of all those things. And if there's a 60-second clock, you got to figure this out ahead of time. If there is if you're in a slow draft, you obviously have time to do this. But Ariel, do you have any kind of final thoughts, anything that you think we missed, or an important thing to kind of hammer home when people are thinking about opportunity cost? Because I think this is something that everyone thinks, at least partially. In increments, they have this as a part of their process, but I think not everyone truly understands how important it is to think. And that's kind of how you build a winning roster from the beginning.
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of good points today. I think the overarching thing is that it's not about the specific player itself. It's about getting your mind to think about the general, what am I doing here? What is the decisions? The more decisions your mind goes with, and okay, I can do this, but wait, I'll do this. Plan ahead. Plan what you're going to do. That'll make your decision process much better and easier to follow. It's less about the players, because remember, if you play next year, you're going to have different decisions to make, right? It's going to be a different player pool. If you take the principles and you understand the principles of how to play, than you can play in any year. Just telling you, hey, Ariel, who do you like better, this guy or this guy? I can tell you my opinion, but it doesn't help you as much as why I like the guy or why it's a good decision to take this guy now versus the other guy. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and as I said, a lot of these things do come down to how you interpret the data. You can look at something and disagree with a projection or a player analysis that an analyst gives you. You have to put your own personal stamp on this as well. We gave a lot of examples on how we feel about this. If you see something, I don't know, the inside track, you think Randy Arozarena, despite the strikeout rate, is going to be a monster. Far be it for us to tell you not to take him. We gave you the reasons why we think it's a bad opportunity cost to take him where he's going.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's you obviously we're not shooting down what anyone wants to do, but
And you could disagree. You could disagree about any player with
yep.
me or you. Like if you think that our argument is wrong or there's a luck or maybe we're not citing some injury thing, God bless you. Like no, you can always skin a cat a different way, and you might have more information and do it better than us, for sure. But be sure you have a reason to do it, not just I like him better. It's
Yes,
very
exactly.
often. Well, I can't take a catcher that early. Why? Why
Yeah.
can't you take it early? If the math says you should do it, if it's a good decision, you could do it.
Yep.
Don't
And,
just
and
blanket things.
I know, and this may seem like a lot of information, especially for anyone newer or for anyone that maybe gets nervous in drafts. There's people that do. When you're going to take a player, just try to look at the players you like at the top of your queue and be like, all right, I'm taking player A. How does this affect me the rest of the way? Just kind of take a quick look around your roster. I'm like, all right, I I like this player and I like this player. If I take him, I'm not taking him. How am I going to fix this later? Just kind of do it real quickly. It'll be amazed. You may change your decision and it may learn from your mistakes as you go. This may be, you'll see it's like, oh, I remember last draft I did this and it didn't work out for me. It's something you learn as you go. It's also something that just comes from experience. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Turn Two. I think this is an important topic. You can feel free to listen back. If you have any questions on Twitter, my DMs are always open. I love talking baseball. If you want to ask a question privately about anything we talked about, I'm happy to answer. Ariel, thank you for coming on the show and taking the time. Let everyone know, they probably already do, but let them know where they can follow you if you're working on anything else, and if you're working on any projects.
As far as fantasy baseball goes, though, because there's a lot of projects going on, Uh, but yeah, my address, my Twitter handle is ATCNY. I write over at Fangraphs. I write over at Rotoballer. Projections are up on those sites as well as CBS Sportsline. I also am the host of the Fangraphs Beat the Shift podcast. Just look up Beat the Shift. And we do a lot of strategy. I mean, we talk about players, obviously, but strategy, which is more, the understanding. This year, I'm working on the ATC projections volatility. So, with player its value and what the projections are, but then there's riskiness of players, and I have some metrics that actually are color what a player's risk is and how to use them. So check that out. I've got a nice article on Rotoballer and a nice video that shows what those metrics are, how to use them, and a lot of we talked about Vladimir Guerrero today. I mentioned in that article why you probably shouldn't draft him ahead of Harper or one of those other guys. So take a look at that, and thanks again, Matt, for having me on the show. This was a wonderful hour. Appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on. And a reminder for everyone: just because an analyst doesn't like a player at cost doesn't mean we don't like the player. I can own a player's jersey and still not want to draft him at cost in fantasy. So again, follow me on Twitter, everyone, MATTWI77IMS. Be sure to subscribe to the show. I never bother to do this announcement like a lot of people do, and I should. If you love the show, please give us a 5-star review. It really helps out the show if you can. So we'll be back next week. So hopefully by then, maybe the lockout ended. Who the heck knows? Fingers crossed, everybody. We'll see you next week. See you.